February 1st, 2025. It was 10 o'clock in the morning when Donald Trump signed his name to an executive order that shook the strongest alliance in modern history. 25% tariffs on Canada, 25% on Mexico, an additional 10% on China. The White House said it was necessary for American security that drugs and illegal migrants were flowing across the Canadian and Mexican borders, and until that stopped, trade would come at a price. But the story that unfolded over the next 13 months was never just about tariffs. It was about what happens when the most powerful country on earth decides to treat its closest neighbor as an enemy. It was about a president who weaponized trade against an ally. It was about markets that shook, jobs that disappeared, and ordinary people on both sides of the border who paid the price for a political decision they never asked for. And then it was about the moment America's own Supreme Court said, enough. Subscribe, leave a comment, share this video, because today I'm going to walk you through the complete story that nobody has told this way before. The White House said it was necessary for American security that drugs and illegal migrants were flowing across the Canadian and Mexican borders, and until that stopped, trade would come at a price. But the story that unfolded over the next 13 months was never just about tariffs. It was about what happens when the most powerful country on earth decides to treat its closest neighbor as an enemy. It was about a president who weaponized trade against an ally. It was about markets that shook, jobs that disappeared, and ordinary people on both sides of the border who paid the price for a political decision they never asked for. And then it was about the moment America's own Supreme Court said, enough. Subscribe, leave a comment, share this video, because today I'm going to walk you through the complete story that nobody has told this way. The executive order signed on February 1st, 2025 was built on a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA. This law gives the president authority to regulate trade during a national emergency. But here is the critical detail. The word tariff appears nowhere in that law, not once. Trump used IEPA to impose tariffs for the very first time in American history. No president before him had ever attempted it. The initial order hit Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs across nearly all goods, with Canadian energy carved out at 10%. Every single day, $2.5 billion worth of goods and services crosses between the United States and Canada. This is the largest bilateral trading relationship on the planet, and with the stroke of a pen, it was set on fire. The White House said it was necessary for American security that drugs and illegal migrants were flowing across the Canadian and Mexican borders, and until that stopped, trade would come at a price. But the story that unfolded over the next 13 months was never just about tariffs. It was about what happens when the most powerful country on earth decides to treat its closest neighbor as an enemy. It was about a president who weaponized trade against an ally. It was about markets that shook, jobs that disappeared, and ordinary people on both sides of the border who paid the price for a political decision they never asked for. And then it was about the moment America's own Supreme Court said, enough. Subscribe, leave a comment, share this video, because today I'm going to walk you through the complete story that nobody has told this way. The executive order signed on February 1st, 2025 was built on a 1977 law called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA. This law gives the president authority to regulate trade during a national emergency. But here is the critical detail. The word tariff appears nowhere in that law, not once. Trump used IEPA to impose tariffs for the very first time in American history. No president before him had ever attempted it. The initial order hit Canada and Mexico with 25% tariffs across nearly all goods, with Canadian energy carved out at 10%. Every single day, $2.5 billion worth of goods and services crosses between the United States and Canada. This is the largest bilateral trading relationship on the planet, and with the stroke of a pen, it was set on fire. The White House argued that Canada was allowing fentanyl to cross the border and failing to stop illegal migration. Canada pushed back immediately, pointing out that less than 1% of fentanyl seized at U.S. borders comes from Canada. The data didn't matter. The order stood. Ottawa responded in a way the White House did not expect. On February 4th, Canada announced 25% retaliatory tariffs on $30 billion worth of American goods. Within 3 weeks, that number climbed to $155 billion. Canadian provinces pulled American wine and spirits off their shelves. Ontario's government-run liquor stores removed all American alcohol from sale. Nova Scotia banned American products from government purchasing contracts. A $100 million Starlink contract was canceled. Then came the political earthquake inside Canada itself. On March 9th, Justin Trudeau delivered his farewell address, telling Canadians the country faced an existential threat unlike anything since the Second World War. That same day, Mark Carney was elected leader of the Liberal Party with 85.9% of the vote on the first ballot. Mark Carney was not a typical politician. He was the former governor of the Bank of Canada, the man who guided Canada through the 2008 financial crisis while every other G7 nation's banking system required a government bailout. Canada's did not. He then served as governor of the Bank of England, managing currency crises and market panic through Brexit in real time. He served as the United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, working directly with sovereign wealth funds and central banks across the globe. When the White House decided to use financial pressure against Canada, they picked a fight with a man who had spent his entire career inside the global financial system. He understood its pressure points, he knew where the vulnerabilities were, and he had seen this kind of crisis before. If the February order was a fire, Liberation Day was a detonation. On April 2, 2025, Trump announced reciprocal tariffs against virtually every country on Earth. The White House released a chart that was supposed to show what other nations charged America in tariffs, but economists immediately pointed out the numbers were calculated incorrectly based on trade deficits rather than actual tariff rates. It didn't matter. The orders went out anyway. By April 7th, the S&P 500 had fallen nearly 19% from its recent high, hovering at the edge of bear market territory. Trillions of dollars in American wealth evaporated in days. Wall Street CEOs made frantic calls to the Treasury. Federal Reserve officials warned privately that the situation was becoming dangerous. Canada filed its second formal complaint against the United States at the World Trade Organization. Then, on April 9th, Trump paused the reciprocal tariffs on most countries, but not China, for 90 days. Markets surged 9.5% in a single day, the largest single-day gain since 2008. The whiplash was unlike anything financial markets had experienced in decades. The tariffs on Canada remained in place. On June 4th, Trump doubled steel and aluminum tariffs to 50%. Carney told reporters that negotiations were ongoing, but warned that if they failed, Canada would retaliate. The Canadian Labour Congress president warned that 23,000 steel jobs and 9,500 aluminum jobs were at immediate risk. Auto industry associations on both sides of the border warned that vehicles crossing the border multiple times during production, which most North American cars do, would become economically unviable to manufacture. At the G7 summit, both countries pledged to reach a deal within 30 days. That deadline passed without a deal. The cumulative tariff burden on Canadian goods entering the United States had now reached 35%. American farmers were losing access to Canadian markets. American manufacturers were paying more for Canadian steel and aluminum. American consumers were paying more for everything. The Tax Foundation estimated that Trump's tariff regime represented the largest American tax increase since 1993. Every American household was paying an estimated $1,000 to $1,300 more per year as a direct result. October brought a moment unlike anything in the history of trade disputes. Ontario Premier Doug Ford launched a $75 million advertising campaign inside the United States, targeted directly at American voters. The ads featured a 1987 clip of Ronald Reagan arguing that tariffs hurt American workers. They ran during World Series games, during NFL broadcasts, during primetime television across swing states. Trump responded on Truth Social that all trade negotiations with Canada were being terminated. Ford temporarily suspended the campaign to keep diplomatic channels open, but the damage to the relationship was visible to everyone watching. One of America's closest allies was spending tens of millions of dollars trying to turn American public opinion against an American president's trade policy. On October 25th, Trump added another 10% to existing Canadian tariffs. On November 5, 2025, the United States Supreme Court heard oral arguments in Learning Resources, Inc. v. Trump. The question before the court was precise: does the EPA give the president the authority to impose tariffs? During arguments, the justices made their skepticism clear. Justice Neil Gorsuch asked whether accepting the government's interpretation would effectively transfer Congress's taxing power to the executive branch through a single emergency statute. Justice Amy Coney Barrett pressed the government's lawyer on whether any statutory limit existed on the tariff rates a president could impose under EPA, and received an answer that seemed to suggest no limit existed. The government argued that regulate in EPA was broad enough to encompass tariffs. The challengers argued that tariffs are taxes, taxes are Congress's constitutional domain, and Congress had never clearly granted the president the power to impose them through emergency statute. Constitutional lawyers on both sides of the aisle watched the arguments and saw the same thing. This was not going well for the White House. February 20th, 2026, a date that will be studied in American constitutional law for generations. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3. EPA does not authorize the president to impose tariffs. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion that while EPA grants broad authority to regulate imports, the word regulate cannot be stretched to mean tax. Tariffs are taxes. The Constitution assigns the power to lay and collect taxes to Congress, not the presidency, for the president to impose tariffs under EPA. Congress would need to have granted that power explicitly and clearly. It had not. The EPA tariffs were struck down, all of them effective midnight, February 24, 2026. Estimates suggest the federal government had collected more than $160 billion in tariff revenue under orders the Supreme Court had now declared unconstitutional. Markets responded immediately. The S&P 500 jumped 4% the morning the ruling was announced. The Canadian dollar strengthened against the US dollar. Bond yields declined slightly as traders priced out some of the inflationary pressure the tariffs had been generating. Trump called the ruling a disgrace and announced he would find another path. Accepting defeat has never been Trump's style. Within hours of the ruling, the administration announced new tariffs under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 and Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. The Section 122 tariff started at 10% globally and climbed to 15% the following day. But Section 122 has hard limits built into the law. The maximum rate is 15%. The tariffs can only last 150 days before requiring congressional approval, and legal scholars argued they were only authorized when the United States faced a genuine balance of payments deficit, a condition that did not currently exist. By March 2026, 24 states had announced plans to challenge the new tariffs in court. Legal analysts predicted another Supreme Court confrontation within 12 to 18 months. The tariff war was not over, but its most powerful weapon had been taken away. Let's look at the numbers. The Tax Foundation calculated that Trump's tariff regime was the largest American tax increase since 1993. The average effective U.S. tariff rate reached approximately 17%, the highest since the 1930s. Research from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York found that approximately 90% of the tariff burden was absorbed by American companies and consumers, not by foreign exporters. The theory that foreign countries pay tariffs was contradicted by the data. Canadian exports to the United States fell from $590 billion to $556 billion in 2025. American exports to Canada also declined. Both countries lost trade. Both countries lost jobs in affected industries. American farmers, who had been a core Trump constituency, lost significant access to Canadian agricultural markets due to retaliatory tariffs. American automakers faced higher input costs. American construction companies paid more for steel. American families paid more for groceries, appliances, and consumer goods. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated that the trade war reduced U.S. GDP growth by approximately 0.5 to 0.7 percentage points over the course of 2025. Nobody won, both sides paid. Change one, constitutional limits are real. The Supreme Court's ruling established something that will constrain every future president. Emergency powers have limits. The president cannot use a national security statute to impose the largest tax increase in a generation without congressional authorization. That principle is now settled law. Every future trade dispute will be fought in a different legal landscape because of this ruling. Change two, alliances are not unconditional. Canada began diversifying its trade relationships in 2025 in a way that would have been politically unthinkable 3 years earlier. New trade agreements with European partners accelerated. Discussions with Asian markets deepened. Mark Carney said publicly that Canada would prioritize relationships with reliable partners. That phrase was a message. Canada heard it, the world heard it, and other American allies took careful note. Change three, USMCA faces a defining moment. In July 2026, all three USMCA partners, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, are scheduled to conduct a joint review of the agreement. They can extend it for 16 years, demand renegotiation, or allow it to expire in 2036. Carney has said Canada wants to trade with partners it can trust. That statement does not sound like a country preparing to extend an agreement with enthusiasm. July-May 2026 be the most consequential trade negotiation of the decade. This story is not over. Section 232 tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automobiles remain in place. Canada's retaliatory tariffs remain in place. New legal challenges are working their way through the courts. The USMCA review is coming, and an American presidential election cycle is beginning to take shape. But one thing has been decided. When the world's most powerful country treats its closest ally as an adversary, the ally changes, the relationship changes, and the world changes. Canada did not start this trade war. Canada did not want this trade war, but Canada fought it. And when America's own Supreme Court ruled, that ruling vindicated the argument Canada had been making since February 1, 2025, that what was being done was not just economically damaging, but legally wrong. The tariff war that was supposed to bring Canada to its knees instead ended with an American Supreme Court ruling, a Canadian Prime Minister who had seen worse crises, and two neighboring countries left to figure out how to rebuild what was broken. History will record the cost. The question now is whether the lesson gets learned. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what do you think happens at the USMCA review in July 2026.